Brian, the Colorado Buffaloes began spring ball on Monday, the first spring practice of the Karl Dorrell era. The last spring practice they had before Monday was on April 30th of 2019. So basically 23 months went by. It's great to be back covering spring ball. I know last year we were kind of scrambling, trying to figure out what we can cover because we got to come up with content, and there just wasn't a whole lot to cover a year ago at this time.
Yeah, it was so nice. I was going to say be out there. We weren't out there, but it was nice to cover a spring practice. And you're right. I mean, a year ago, you and I met for lunch. We did one of these videos to preview spring, and then spring never happened. So, it's nice that it's happening, and it is crazy. It's been so long. I mean, last spring practice they had, it was Sam Neuer and Tyler Lytle, lighting things up in that spring game with under Mel Tucker. So it's been a while, and you could tell. For me, I don't know, your impressions. I could see sort of an extra bounce in the step of Karl Dorrell as he spoke with us, and you could tell he was excited to be back out there.
No doubt. And they've got 6 early enrollees that are on scholarship that are getting their feet wet. And it was the first practice for Robert Barnes, who transferred in from Oklahoma. We thought maybe he would be a safety or star, but he's practicing at inside linebacker. Karl Dorrell said it's the Mo position. I would imagine that's short for money position, which is kind of a versatile linebacker position. Anxious to kind of hear how those guys factor in here as we go forward. I think Robert Barnes, the fact that he's at that inside linebacker position shows that they're really putting a premium on getting guys out there that can play in space, kind of identifying that as a weakness that we saw show itself there late after Nate Landman went down with an injury last season.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting position, Adam, because they're a little shorthanded this spring. Well, obviously with Nate Landman being out, you have Chase Newman that left the program. Ray Robinson is now listed as a safety, which is probably a better spot for him. There's probably more chance to get on the field. There's some change there going on inside linebacker. So my initial thoughts when I saw him listed there was a little bit surprised, but it makes sense. And I think, he's a bigger guy and he's got some speed, and you want speed at linebacker. And clearly that was something they were missing last year when Nate was out. And, a guy like John Van Dies, I mean, coming back from the bowl game, I was on the same flight as the Van Dies family and was chatting with them in the airport. And, and his dad was saying that right away, John was going to start working with a speed coach because he knew that was something that he had to improve upon. So speed is the name of the game at that position. And so it makes sense to have Robert Barnes there.
They played 6 games in 2020, but doesn't it feel like in some regards, this is kind of the start of the Karl Dorrell era? When he came in last year, he wasn't able to make all the changes that he probably felt like he wanted to make at that point. And this being, a full off season for him, he brings in a new strength and conditioning coach. He picks his defensive coordinator. They're going to learn new terminology with Chris Wilson getting elevated there to defensive coordinator. Even though they went 4-2, it on some level, it does still kind of feel like this is the beginning of the Karl Dorrell era, to me at least.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that was one thing, especially the way everything played out last year. I think being hired late, there was almost somewhat of a mulligan people were going to give him anyway. But then with the way everything played out and being a COVID year and only 6 games, it was really kind of a free year for Karl Dorrell, and they happened to just make the most of it by getting to a bowl game. So, kudos to them for that. But I think you're right that Karl's taken this time to make some changes on the staff to get it the way he wants it, get that terminology the way they want it. And I wrote a story recently about they did football school. There was a lot of fundamental things that Karl was telling me that they realized they just didn't have a chance to get to last year because of how strange the offseason was. And so they took some time to really kind of get down to basics and kind of start from scratch and make it fundamentally based this offseason. So I think that this is kind of the start of the Karl Dorrell era in some ways.
Karl Dorrell also mentioned they're going to be implementing more motions and shifts on offense. He said he felt they were a little bland in that sense last year. Hope springs eternal. Every spring there's going to be positive stories. You're not losing any football games, but we had a chance to do a Zoom call with the new assistant coaches, and Shannon Turley was on that. And I came away really impressed with just the energy of these new guys on the staff. Mark Smith definitely stood out from that sense, and I like his progressive approach. He had the inside linebackers take a VAC test, I think is what they call it, where he kind of learns how those players best learn. I came away pretty impressed. Shannon Turley, you can tell he's going to be a real useful tool in recruiting, just the way he comes off and can really explain kind of the progressive approach that he has as well with that strength program that he's really starting from. He feels like he's starting from scratch almost.
Yeah, and I think that was the biggest move that Karl Dorrell made this offseason was getting Shannon Turley. And, Shannon would not be available if it wasn't for, an incident that happened. Nobody – it hasn't been out there publicly, what happened at Stanford, but something happened, and he wouldn't be available if it wasn't for that, because Stanford, he was great at Stanford. They loved him. He loved the guys there. I had a chance to talk to one of their players when he was first hired, and he was telling me, he's so beloved by the players, and so much so that when they were there, guys like Richard Sherman and Doug Baldwin, who played at Stanford, would come back in the offseason because they wanted to work with Shannon a little bit in the offseason, and how much of an impact that made on players. That imagine being in spring ball and Richard Sherman, shows up to work out, and you're a cornerback, you're Mekhi Blackman. Richard Sherman shows up to work out, but also gives you some pointers at corner. So that makes an impact. When guys want to come back from the NFL to work out with their strength coach from college, that tells you, that he does a good job. So I think that was a huge hire for Colorado.
Brian Cook goes from a quality control job on defense over to be the new tight ends coach, and he's got a lot of guys to work with. Brian, he mentioned that they don't really need to see Brady Russell out there that much this spring coming back from that injury, because they got to figure out what those other 11 guys in that room can do. A lot of potential, but not a lot of proven talent in that room. It's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. I don't necessarily think there's going to be 12 guys at that position going into camp, but right now they've got a lot of guys competing there.
Yeah, it's crazy that outside of Brady, the only other scholarship tight end who played last year was Alec Pell, who started the year, and played half the year on defense before moving over. So there is a lot of raw talent there. And crazy, Adam, I looked this up the other day. Mike McIntyre's last year, 2018, they had 6 tight ends on the roster. They have 12 right now. It tells you what Karl Dorrell thinks of this position. They want to emphasize it, and also they want to find good tight ends. And they've got an interesting mix of players, from some bigger guys, some smaller guys, some that seem to be more like blockers, some that are more like receivers. And it's an interesting mix. I'm curious to see who actually winds up playing there. Brian Cook had a lot of good things to say about some of those young guys, and he said he's really excited about Eric Olson. And we didn't even ask about Caleb Fourier, which may be bad on us, but he brought him up and said, hey, guys, we're not even talking about him yet. I'm excited about this kid. And Caleb was hurt last year, so it'll be interesting to see what he does. Caleb came in with a little bit of hype. Obviously, his dad played tight end at CU. So I think there's a lot of good young talent. Hopefully Brady stays healthy, and if he has the year we expect, I'm not sure any of those other guys are going to get on the field, but I think there's a bright future for that position for the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Alex Fontenot was on after Karl Dorrell following the first spring practice. He was chomping at the bit to get out there after having that hip injury, have him sidelined last year. There's just kind of this quiet confidence about Alex Fontenot. He's definitely going to have a role on this team, even though Jarek Broussard obviously broke out last year. It could be a pretty good 1-2 punch there, and obviously you can't forget about Ashad Clayton in that running backs room as well.
Yeah, I like Alex. He's very soft-spoken. He doesn't say a lot at all. And he was asked about the competition, and his answer was pretty short, but he said, I'm going to be on the field. I'm going to find a way on the field, something like that. So he was very complimentary of what Jarek did last year, and thinks Ashad's got a lot of talent, but he's confident himself. You're right. There's that quiet confidence, and Alex, he's going to have a big role on this team. And there's nothing bad about that. Jarek Broussard, I don't think over a 12-game season you want him carrying the ball, 26 times at his size. You want to get him, I think, 17, 18 carries, and then let's get Alex, 7, 8, 9, 10 carries. So I think that group is really good and has some really good potential this year.
They also announced the award winners for the 2020 season. one thing that jumped off the page there, Brian, was that Terrence Lang was named the Outstanding Team Leadership Award winner, the Eddie Crowder Award. He came in and he wasn't, a bad teammate by any level, but we had heard maybe he didn't have the work ethic, and that's kind of picked up over time. And so it's cool to see him get that award, somebody that has seemingly gotten better in every regard every year since he's stepped foot on campus.
Yeah, I always remember, chatting with Philip Lindsay his senior year, right towards the end, right before that last game. And he was telling me that he wishes he had Terrence Lang's body, that he had that body, because he was so impressed with, how chiseled Terrence was. And Philip told me, because if he ever figures it out as far as the work ethic, he's going to be really, really dominant. And but he wasn't saying it in a bad way. He was just saying a lot of freshmen, obviously, at that time, don't really figure it out. But he said if he ever figures that aspect out, he's going to be dominant. And it really seems like Terrence has. I mean, he's gotten better every year. I really like seeing him on that leadership, getting that leadership award, because he was a quiet kid when he first got here. As I think he's gotten better in interviews. I don't know how you feel, but you can just see him getting more comfortable in all aspects of his life as you talk to him and as you see him play.
Yeah, and with Mustafa Johnson moving on to the NFL, they really need him to be that guy that's, in discussion for all conference honors, this coming year. And I think he can obviously do that. The leadership has come along, and that's awesome. Brian, we could talk for, I would imagine, 2 hours here right now, but there's 14 more spring practices, so we'll cut this short here. But really excited to get back. Just, we're not back to 100% normal life, but every month it feels like we're getting a little bit closer. And so this is great. We're going to get a chance to go see a scrimmage here in about a week and a half, and there's a spring showcase later this month. So I know the fans are chomping at the bit to get back to their Folsom Field. So we can kind of be their eyes and ears here in the meantime.
Yeah, and hopefully there will be some fans there at that spring game on April 30th, and they can see it for themselves. But yeah, we're slowly getting back to normal, I hope, and one day maybe we'll do one of these videos in person again.
That would be nice. All right, we'll be back with the new analysis video later this week.